Our next fallacy of form is called the false dilemma. Some people call it a false dichotomy or the either-or fallacy. Any of those is correct. Both the words dilemma and dichotomy indicate that there are two choices or things to be dealt with. Di means two. For instance, a carbon dioxide molecule has one carbon atom and two oxygen atoms. That's where they get the dioxide from. If it just had one oxygen atom with one carbon atom, it would be carbon monoxide. In a false dilemma, only two options are presented, falsely giving the impression that there are only two choices to be had. So, let's talk about what a true dilemma is. We use the word dilemma to describe a tough choice someone has to make. It usually describes situations where someone has to choose between two alternatives, and both choices are equally bad. In Star Wars Return of the Jedi, Episode 6, Darth Vader has a dilemma near the end of the movie. Should he remain loyal to the Emperor, as he has for years, or should he save this other guy's life and prevent him from being taken by the dark side? He can't do both. He has to choose one. Now, in case you haven't seen this movie, it's only been out since 1983, I won't spoil it for you by telling you what he chooses. But what he faces here is a dilemma. He stands to lose big no matter which choice he makes. Now, he could try to make a different choice altogether, but no matter what else he tried, the Emperor would probably kill or hurt the other guy anyway. So, no matter what he tries, if he doesn't deliberately choose to save the other guy, then Darth Vader will be choosing to let the Emperor destroy him. So, that's a dilemma. So, what makes a false dilemma? A false dilemma occurs when a situation is presented like a dilemma, but it isn't actually a dilemma. The basic form would be something like this. Choice A is an option. Choice B is an option. You must choose either A or B. There are no other options. And of course, this is only a fallacy when there really are other options. For example, you didn't wash the dishes? You must be either dumb or lazy. In this case, there are two choices presented. Either the person is dumb or the person is lazy. In reality, maybe they didn't wash the dishes because they were very busy, or maybe they were sick. But none of those choices are presented by the speaker. If someone isn't paying attention, they may believe that those are actually the only two choices. Now, hopefully no one will assume that they are either dumb or lazy if those are the only two choices that someone gives them. But sometimes this fallacy is a little harder to detect. Consider this example. If you care about the future of our children, you must vote for the school bond issue. This is a false dilemma. Let's reword it a little differently. Either you vote for the school bond issue, or you don't care about the future of our children. Is this true? Well, think of counterexamples. Maybe you do care about the future of our children, but you believe that the school bond issue wouldn't actually provide more money for schools. Maybe you vote for the school bond issue, but not because you care about the future of our children. Maybe it's because you know the guy that wrote the bond issue and he'd be mad if you didn't vote for it. So there are lots of possibilities besides just these two. Here's one more example, similar to the slippery slope fallacy we looked at earlier. Either I get into medical school or my life will be ruined. Where's the fallacy? Well, like we said before, there are plenty more choices for having a good life besides getting into medical school. You can get a perfectly good and useful education at many schools, or maybe you bypass college and get technical training, or go straight to work, or stay home with your kids. Any of those could lead to a fulfilling life. Maybe you think your life will be ruined if you do go to medical school. The idea that it has to be either or is false. So, when is a dilemma not a fallacy? When there are really only two choices. Darth Vader's example, for instance, was an actual dilemma, at least as far as we could see. There are other times when you might really have just two choices. If I'm serving ice cream and I have one flavor, your choices are pretty much either to have ice cream or to not have any ice cream. If your teacher has calculated that your grade and tells you that you need to make at least an 87 on the last test or you'll flunk the class, those are probably your options. Make at least an 87 or flunk the class. It becomes a fallacy when there are actually many choices, but you are presented with only two in an effort to get you to choose one of those. Watch for interviewers attempting to trap politicians in false dilemmas and making them confess to something they wouldn't have otherwise. The last logical fallacy we will discuss in this module is the weak or false analogy. An analogy is used fallaciously if the comparison doesn't really apply. In order to discuss a weak or false analogy, we need to first discuss what an actual analogy is. Someone is using an analogy when they compare two things to each other that aren't really the same, but you can gain some interesting insights if you think of them together. One analogy people use a lot is to compare life to a race. Both life and a race have a starting point and a finish line, and in between you've got to keep going or you will never meet your end goal. If you run off the track and into the woods, you won't make it to the finish line. If you don't keep working toward your goals in life, you'll never achieve them, and so forth. A race and life are not really the same thing at all, but looking for similarities can inspire you to keep moving and accomplish your goals. That's an analogy. An analogy is used fallaciously when someone tries to use it to prove some other point. For example, people should never wear high heels if they want to achieve their goals. This is because life is like a race, and you wouldn't wear high heels in a race. Well, okay, we can see that just because the analogy of life being like a race works in some respects does not mean that it works in all respects. And it certainly doesn't count as evidence that people should not wear high heels. On the other hand, now that I look at it, I kind of like the slogan on the screen. It's kind of funny. But it's funny because the analogy does not go where you would expect it to. Now, in this case, an analogy does not necessarily have to look all poetic, like a poetic analogy. Sometimes it might just be a misunderstanding of common characteristics. For instance, my mother had an experience with one of her children, not saying which one, in which she had told the kid that a cat takes a bath by licking itself. So then the kid got this idea that licking herself should be an acceptable bathing alternative for a person as well. If the cat could do it, so could she. Now, in this case, we don't have a formal statement about cats are like humans or anything like that. We do have a kid that recognized that cats and humans both take baths and then took it a step too far and assumed that they could take the same kinds of baths. So, watch for weak analogies in real life. You may hear someone giving a soul-stirring speech sometime that compares something to something else, but if you think about it, those things might not be really comparable. Let's quickly go over what we've talked about in this module. Fallacies of form occur when an argument has a structural problem that makes it invalid. With circular reasoning, the premises plus conclusion don't actually get you anywhere. A post hoc ergo propter hoc, or post hoc fallacy, assumes that something, thing 1, that happened before something else, thing 2, must have caused it, thing 2, to happen. A hasty generalization tries to prove an argument with only one or a few isolated examples. A slippery slope fallacy argues that the occurrence of one thing will lead to a chain reaction that will eventually result in something extreme. In a false dilemma, only two options are presented, falsely giving the impression that there are only two choices to be had. A false or weak analogy is fallaciously used if the comparison doesn't really apply. Well, it's time for yet another quiz. See you again in Module 6.